and I have assembled here before your very eyes a superlative panel of organic farmers, all, I would say, leading edge, carefully selected for the different regions and growing styles of the province. Actually, they're random, just whatever ones that would say yes. So we're going to hear first from Al McKenzie, who, if you know him, of course did not bring slides, but fortunately Scott presented all his slides anyway, so if he has something that he wants to refresh your visual memory with, we could put up the last presentation and cycle through them. All the ones that said Nesbitt were from Al's farm. Or Napinka. So that was like maybe 10 or 20% of them. So take it away, Alan.
It's been my usual fashion. Totally winging this one. It wouldn't be bad if I at least had a little bit of a slideshow, but I didn't even write anything down here. So I guess we'll just go off the cuff here. And so we farm about 25 miles south of Brandon here in a little hamlet called Nesbitt. We've been organic since 2003. We started transitioning over. We run a mixed operation, my wife and I. My brother, he's got a separate operation, but we work back and forth together. Probably about 2,000 acres of arable land, and then a bit of probably 150 mama cows in the mix there. So we ran a bunch of native pastures, and then we integrate cover crops in the mixture there. Grow a pretty diverse mixture of crops over the years: canola, mustard, peas, lots of wheat. I love my winter annuals there. That's a big one for us, is winter wheat, fall rye, that sort of thing that we can get in there on our plow down years. I think the cover crop thing ended up going down to Burleigh County in about 2005. They had this soil health workshop. Michael Teely gathered up a van load of us there, and we went down, and I was just blown away. I'd never seen anything like it, because around home it's pretty much monocrop. And I was the only one really ever doing anything even wonky, which was sweet clover, nothing else. And so when you get down to see Gabe Brown and those guys down there, and Ken Miller and Jay Fuhrer and that, it was a real eye-opener. So I guess we started the first year, we went down for just a summer tour, seen a bunch of different plots where they had a bunch of different annual mixtures there, and then they put up, or shouldn't say mixtures, but they had annual species, and then they put a mixture together there of the species combined, and night and day difference. They had about 1.5 inches of rain on the end of July, and most of those crops, there was basically nothing there, and then all of a sudden at the edge of the field in the one trial, there was this beautiful green 1.5-foot growth there, and that was the difference. So after seeing that, it was kind of a light bulb moment, and so started following it up some more. And then the winter time, we go back down to the States there. They had a really good workshop in January and bring some excellent cover crop speakers up. So first 2 to 3 years of that one, we come back home and start integrating a little bit of it. And as the time went by, we just started bumping up the mixtures. We would start off with kind of a two-way hairy vetch, winter wheat. Next thing we kind of bump up, and then we started into the brassicas with the turnip radish, and just kept adding there. So within a couple of years after that, we were up to about a 10-way mixture. And for us in our organic program, it worked out very well. We were needing a way to build up some fertility here, so it allowed us to basically have a way that we could justify spending $30, $35 an acre on cover crop seed, because we're basically looking for a nitrogen source anyway, and a way to integrate the livestock as well, so then we could capture the extra value out of that one. So basically for the last 10 years, we've just been slowly building up our mixtures. Lately, what we're working on now is going with a sweet clover, which is probably one of my favorite crops. We grow it for seed, and we also grow it just as an underseeded crop there and for livestock. So what we're doing now, we'll take a sweet clover hairy vetch mixture that was seeded the year before. We'll chop that for silage or graze it the first, maybe the middle of June, and then we'll turn around and double crop it, and we'll sow in a warm season grazing mix there, where we'll have sorghum, vetch, kale, phacelia, couple different millets maybe in the mixture there, and then we'll look at using that as our fall grazing mix there. So we'll start to bring cows home about the middle of October. We drive them home, and then we'll turn around and we'll graze some stubble there, which usually has some sweet clover underseeded. This year we also went with a bit of rye, some ryegrass, a couple other mixtures there too, where we can have them grazing something when they come back there. And then after that, the sorghum kale vetch mixture, we'll start usually grazing that about the middle of November, depending on the year. So that gives us probably a month of grazing there too. So our whole idea is just to keep those cows out in the land and basically being as cost effective as they can. Plus we're getting all the benefits that way. So hopefully the following year we'll be able to go in and grow a 35, 40 bushel organic wheat crop there that didn't cost us a lot of money to grow. We'll usually follow that with an oat crop. We've also got some years, the year after, we'll try mustard and then follow with oats, underseed back to clover. Then usually we'll start to run in some weed pressure, so then we go back to an alfalfa underseeded with that one and try to take a couple of years of that one off. With the cover crops, fertility just in general on the organic side has been a real battle for us. And I used to be in the commercial hay business, so we were really good at mining. Everybody was like, oh, alfalfa is the best thing in the world, and it is until you run out of phosphorus and basically can't grow a cereal crop following it, and then you sow back to alfalfa. So we've been bringing in manures here for the last couple of years, and what I found even with the cover crops, I used to get so frustrated because guys would start saying, well, geez, you know, all you need is this cover crop and bang, it's magical. Within a year or two, you'll be back to 40 bushel wheat and all these other amazing yields, and we weren't seeing it. But the problem was, if you don't have enough nutrients to grow the cover crop, you're not going to have enough to amount to build even enough nitrogen back in your soil or even pulling up your phosphorus either. So when the guys were talking earlier today about that one, I think that's key. Just because you're growing cover crops, they still need their groceries too to keep them performing for you. And so I think that's been one of the biggest things I've found for us, is once we got our fertility up, after you grow a good cover crop, your potential for your following cash crop is huge compared to what we used to work with, where you're running on a low fertility system, because you can put all the diversity in the world, but if you don't have enough biomass going there, and you basically are limited with your end fixation there. Other than that, yeah, I guess just ask any questions once the time comes around.
Okay, thanks, Alan. I was worried that the conventional farmer panel would have a higher hipster quotient, but but we have Scott Beaton, so I'm not worried. So Scott farms just a little bit north of Winnipeg, and he's a very leading edge entrepreneur. He also has a day job at Manitoba Heritage Conservation. So obviously biodiversity runs deep in his soul, and he's doing a lot of really interesting things on his farm. So here's Scott to tell you about some of them.
All right, thank you. I walked in, I was a little bit late getting here this morning. Laura gave me a hard time, and now she did it again. And when I was standing in the back of the room, I thought, I don't know too many of your faces. Now that I see your faces, I still think more of you are foreign to me than are not, which I'm quite happy to see, I guess. I thought I was going to be walking in a room that everybody knew who I was, and I already told them all this stuff, so I didn't need to say it again. What she said about, so I work for MHHC as well. I do conservation programming, and I think I try to drill it into my boss's heads day in and day out that this is good for wildlife. I heard a comment from somebody earlier saying, well, I tried growing cover crops 10 years ago, but I couldn't keep the wildlife out of them. And so when that goes in my ear, that sounds like, oh, that's kind of a bit of a pain in the ass, but if you tell that to my bosses, well, that kind of sounds like a good thing then to them. And so I think there's a good fit there. I think there's a great fit for grazing cover crops to take livestock out of perennial season when we probably should be resting those native pastures anyways. And so when you guys are talking to conservation groups and hoping that they're gonna start paying for some of this stuff, I think those are the arguments that I wanna see you make, because I think they're falling on deaf ears right now, but I think there is a huge fit there for those types of people. So Laura wanted me to talk, I'll give you a general background about the farm for 10 minutes, and then she didn't want me to say anything about cover crops, because that would detract from what we have to talk about later, and I'm gonna break the rules, because she moved one step over, she can't hit me. So I farm about a section, which is enough for me at the moment. I try to grow organic grains, and this is the list, but cereals, a couple oil seeds, and some legumes, and then we grow some green manures and spot on crops. I'm kind of unique in that half the farm is on heavy clay, red river clay from by Rosser. It looks like this stuff, nice and black, but more often is too wet than too dry. And the last 2 years have been the exception, and it's taught me some hard lessons. The other half of my farm is north of Stonewall near the gravel pits by Balmoral. It's sandy loam, I think is how it's classed. And it's generally too dry more than it is too wet. And being an organic farm here is much easier than being an organic farm on heavy clay soils. And John here, I heard his voice earlier, he has all the heavy clay soils, and it's tough doing things in a timely fashion, I find, on that heavy kind of soil. I don't know where to point this, so I just point. We've already seen this. I went to North Dakota to get my snurge picture, just to be clear. I went to Botany Grill last winter and saw that on the way home. And I think that was a big driver for me to start looking at cover crops. We've heard this already today, so I won't focus on it too much, but probably the bottom two organic farms are generally limited by nitrogen, and that's what Al was just saying with his lack of phosphorus is leading to a lack of nitrogen problem on in his system. And so you'll notice probably that all three of us got a heavy lean towards making sure we've got a good legume in our mixes. Grow more carbon, manage moisture, improve soil health. I think if we've heard a few times today that you got to be a little bit careful with fall rye or cereal rye because it's thirsty, but it's putting roots in the ground. This fall we've got excess moisture situation. I think a lot of that moisture is getting down through those root channels and getting into the ground. All my life, it snows all winter, the ground freezes, and then in the spring we watch the snow run off, and then the frost comes out of the ground, and we've just watched all our moisture run off. We started growing hemp 6 or 7 or 8 probably years ago now, and that didn't happen. You kept the frost out of the ground with all that standing stubble. In springtime, there was no runoff came off of most of those fields because all of a sudden there was those root channels, there was little frost in the ground, and moisture actually went down and stuck around to do us some good later going on. And I think that's been a great thing with cover crops, is its ability to manage moisture and moderate these extreme either drought or too much moisture. If you can give that water somewhere to go, it'll do you a favor later on. So I'll go through these fairly quickly because I'm not supposed to go through them at all. But I wanted to give you something to look at so that you'd have something for your questions around a little bit more. So I grew, this is a pea, fava bean, wild mustard. There's some radishes under there and oat mix. I worked it under in July, and that's because this wild mustard was starting to get to the stage where it could go to seed, and now the radish is starting to flower and not make a big radish root that we were hoping for. And then I seeded that down to a catch crop. And I want to give you a bit of an idea on budgets here on doing this, and most of you guys have got this in your minds already, but I want to go through the progression of how I got to where I am today. And so between those two seeding classes, I worked it under, or seed cost, seeded it twice, worked it under, and then let this crop winter kill, that cost me about $85 so fairly expensive. That's was never good. I didn't go through diploma, so I didn't do my budgets very well, but that's my cost over and above my fixed cost. That's my operating cost. That's what I'm looking for. The following year, we added perennial into the mix. So this was a Fabidine oat clover seeded in the end of April, mowed on the left, middle of July, and then August is the regrow. So a month later, and I don't know how well you guys can see that, but that was up to my waist in thick rank, mostly oats and clover that came back. So that was good. And then I let that regrowth grow, and this is working it under in September. And then we got some some oats coming back to be a bit of a cash crop after that. $100 an acre, so it got more expensive. I don't know if that's the direction I wanted to go. Harrowing clover into this is a fall rye crop. So on May the 3rd, we harrowed in. It's a mix of red and Alside clover. That's what it looked like after harvest. Very good. This is the following year. I mowed it twice and then let it regrow again and dissed that under. Now we are up to $130 an acre, each one getting more expensive than the last, more involved, more things to do. But I think this was still good. We got piles of growth. That's volunteer rye, which I don't mind getting out of the seed bank. So there's a few good things going on. So what to do next, and the hint is in the top of the picture. There's a weird wire running across. And so this was last summer, and the guys earlier talked about this. I think grazing livestock is a key to making this work in terms of economics in a crop production system. So I custom grazed some cow-calf pairs on this particular field. We had 20 pairs on 40 acres for 40 days. This was a cornfield last year, and on my last inter-row cultivation, I broadcast. There was alfalfa, orchard grass, mixed with a little bit of clover. And this is what came back this year. We heard a comment about, Lee actually talked about shorter corn varieties, which I think we're almost growing the shortest corn varieties that we can, just because that's what we can get to harvest. And I didn't comment this until March, so maybe we can get them to harvest. But I think that in organic systems, we're using less fertilizer. I keep looking at Scott's data, and I think all of what he's doing are good things. But I wonder sometimes, and I know you're doing some with less nitrogen, but I think that the fact that we have less nitrogen available often lends itself to a little more light penetration through the canopy and just more resources available for our growers. And so yeah, I think this has been a good thing. These cows, after they finished on this piece, they went across the on to the next quarter, and there was oat and annual clover. Actually, I think I showed it in a minute here. It's oat and annual clover mix, and they grazed that, and then they came back to this. And so actually, the numbers here are conservative, because they ended up coming back and grazing and spending another 30 days on this side of the fence. So this meant that rather than spend $130 an acre, I was pretty much netting out at zero. And I think I'll leave that likely one more year, and we'll graze it again next year, and then work it under in the fall, and that'll be our high fertility field going forward. This is that oat annual clover mix. I don't generally like grazing this much. Like we had there's about 3 or 4 paddocks going north to the left here that had some problems with Canada thistle, and so we grazed it pretty hard. This would have been in August or so, and then as we got out of those patches, we grazed a little lighter and left probably half behind. And we got very good regrowth actually, even in these that we grazed down so hard with all those clovers, and they came back and did quite well later on. So yeah, this was just a little bit of a note here, but I really think that grazing animals, and I don't care what kind of animals they are, make cover crops work in these kind of crop production systems. And so if you don't have cows and you don't want to have cows, then I suggest you find somebody that's interested in trying to figure out a way to work with them. Yeah, just I think the big driver for me was I was sick and tired of burning diesel fuel and sitting in a tractor. I don't mind sitting in a tractor, but I farm a section, and I can't imagine you guys that farm much more than me, how much time you sit there, but you guys drive yourself crazy some days. So yeah, there's more equipment costs, more appreciation with trying to manage them without livestock, and so you spend a little bit of time out moving cows around, and I think anybody, once you start doing that, you can enjoy it. I need to yell at them sometimes, but for the most part, it's good. So yeah, that's all I got for now, and we'll ask more questions.
Last but definitely not least, Jason Peters is one of the agronomists at Kroeker Farms, and I think everyone in this room who isn't from North Dakota knows who Kroeker Farms is, one of the largest maybe the largest potato farm in the province. But what you may not know is probably also one of the largest organic farms in the province. And so I'm going to let Jason take you through what he has been doing on the farm.
All right, thanks, Laura. Like Laura said, my name is Jason Peters. I'm one of the agronomists over at Kroeker Farms. I'll start by just taking you through a little bit about what the farm is about. I'll give you a bit of background on myself, and then we'll talk about a bit about the green manure program that we have and how it's evolved over the last few years. So Kroeker Farms, we are headquartered in Winkler, Manitoba. Most of our land is right along the edge of the Pembina Valley Escarpment, and so it's an old lake bed, and we're kind of on the sandiest ridge of it. So it's really good land for growing potatoes. We either own or have access to about 20,000 acres, and on the conventional side of the farm, we only grow potatoes. We're pretty much primarily a potato farm. So 5,500 acres of potatoes every year, everything from seed, table potatoes, which are your reds and yellows that you find in the store, creamer potatoes, which are the little baby ones, and then we have about 1,300 acres of organic potatoes as well. We're pretty big. We got 12 divisions on the farm and over 200 employees, so there's lots happening. On the organic side, the organic company is called Poplar Grove Organics, or PGF Organics. We have about 4,500 acres of certified organic land. And you can see the breakdown of what we grow there approximately on a yearly basis. We keep things fairly simple as far as our rotation goes. We run a 3-year rotation. It's a vegetable, typically potatoes, followed by grain, which in the last few years has typically been hemp. And then our third and final year is the green manure year. And so let's spend some time talking about that green manure. So on our farm, as far as increasing fertility in our fields, because we're in an organic system, we can't use your conventional inputs. We have 2 methods, and one is the green manure, and the other is compost. And I liked what Al's comment was before about needing that compost to grow a good green manure crop. I find that if we stretch that or we don't apply compost at the right time, those green manure crops suffer, and in turn the whole rotation does. So those 2 things, at least in my experience, they really do complement each other. Our main goal, I would say, with the green manure has been to produce nitrogen, like Scott mentioned. That's one of the toughest things to come by in the organic system, and that's one of the things that, at least economically, we feel like we can kind of put some numbers to. There's also a lot of other benefits that come along with green manure, you know, soil health and diversity, some of these other things, but they're a bit harder to put numbers to. And so we're thinking about it, but it's just this one. Whatever, when you're trying to make a case for something, it seems to, you can justify it, essentially. So I'll walk you through our program a bit, and this has kind of evolved over the last 5 or 6 years. I started about 6 years ago at Kroeker's and had no experience in organic or any sort of outside the box type farming at all. I grew up on a conventional farm just outside of Winkler. And I did a 4-year ag degree at the U of M and worked for Richardson and DuPont Pioneer before coming on to Kroeker's. So really no experience whatsoever, but kind of just jumped in, and it was definitely a good challenge getting to kind of dive into this organic world. So when I got to Kroeker's, our green manure program was essentially a pea and oat mix that would get planted in the middle of June. We'd work it down in the middle of August, and for the next month and a half until winter, the land would stay black. Essentially, we'd work it and keep the weeds down, but that was about it. And so over the last couple of years, we really took a look at that 1 year. If we're going to commit a whole year to growing green manure, you know, how can we make the most out of this year? And so a couple of years ago, I think 2017, we kind of came up with this idea, which is really nothing new. We just kind of made it fit to our own farm, but we decided to grow 2 rounds of green manure in 1 year. And so we've run this program for the last couple of years and are kind of happy with it. I don't know, we try and tweak it all the time, but I'll walk you through what it is and then kind of walk you through where we're headed. But anyway, in early May, we will plant a pea and oat mixture. So 2 bushels of peas, 1 bushel of oats. And the goal here is just to maximize our legume production, so to maximize that nitrogen. So we will let it grow until the oats have headed out, the peas have started to flower. The idea is to maximize the biomass. And typically, you know, we'll get between 60 and 100 pounds of nitrogen out of this first round. After 60 days, so this takes you to early July, we'll shred it and we'll disc it with a discer like this, and we'll seed it, and that all happens pretty much within a couple of hours of each other. Basically to preserve moisture. Early July is not a great time to be seeding things, especially in our sandy soil. It tends to dry out really quick. And so we want to try and keep, not open up that soil any longer than we have to. So that second round of seeding in early July is essentially a mixture of worm seeds and soybeans, barley, tillage radish, and brown mustard, and they each have their own purpose within this rotation. The soybean is to add more nitrogen. The barley, I don't know, I've gone back and forth on this when we've tried barley or sorghum. Sorghum's a dangrass because it's also a warm seed, which we figured would work better. The barley really doesn't grow a whole lot in this mix, it just kind of stays underneath, but I think the root, it's got the nice big fibrous root, which we're hoping is soaking up some of the previous green manure that's starting to release its nutrients. Same with the tillage radish, it's got a big root on it that goes down. And the brown mustard, like Scott had mentioned, we've been reading about the benefits for potatoes. So we figured we'd put that in there as well. This is 2017, so this is the first time we did this, and it actually looked really good. You can see we put the soybeans down, the mid-row banders on our seeder, and then the rest of the mixture came in between. It's hard to see the radish and the barley, but they are underneath there. The mustard ended up getting pretty tall, looked really nice. The soybeans, we got good nodulation, and we did some biomass sampling, we figured we probably got another 40 pounds of nitrogen or so out of this stuff, or out of this mixture on the second round. So we were happy with that. The tillage radish, we got, some decent sized carrots, I would say. And then the brown mustard, this is, I think, a day or two before we took this down, but it flowered very nicely. And the idea with that is we would shred this and then work it into the soil, and that's how you get your control. So this mixture would go for about 45 days. 45, 50 days, and then we would shred it, work it in, and then plant a fall catch crop, barley, in early September. So, and the idea here was just to, basically have something growing during those last month or two and try and catch any of the nutrients that were going to be released from those previous two green manures. So there's some pros and cons to this system. Some of the pros, we do produce, a pretty decent amount of nitrogen out of this. I think almost as best as you could hope for, given the season that we have. The other benefit is that when we do that tillage pass in the summer, what we do is we prevent a lot of those annual weeds from going to seed. So when that PO mixture is flowering, typically your lamb's quarters and your pigweed, they're all at that point where they're just about ready to set seed, and so we can wipe all that out, and it really helps to clean up the fields. So there is a benefit to that. Some of the downsides, though, in a dry year, especially the last couple of years, we've got almost nothing out of the second round, and it's a pretty big investment when you consider the cost of all that seed, all the equipment running across the field. If the moisture is not there, the flea beetles have been there to take care of those brassicas, and we've ended up with a couple of crops of just soybeans and barley essentially, because all the brassicas get eaten. It depends on the year. Like I mentioned before, it's a lot of labor and equipment costs going through the field all these times to work all this stuff up, and we're doing more tillage, which in a potato system already, it's fairly tillage intensive. It'd be nice to get away from it if we could, thinking about some of these soil health principles and whatnot. So that led us to thinking about, could we get a full season green manure going on our farm and still make it work? And also, this is not a new concept, but we're trying to make it fit for our farm. So the idea was to address some of these challenges. If we could have a full season, we didn't have to worry about tilling it up in the summer and and disturbing that soil, drying it out, that kind of thing. And hopefully we could save on some of the labor and equipment costs and give the guys a few days off in the middle of summer. And it seemed like it would fit well with some of these soil health principles, keeping that, whatever, according to Gabe, that armor on the soil, less disturbance, living root, added diversity, that kind of thing. And so, and while still getting the most out of your nitrogen production. So we figured we'd try a four-way mix. 2 cool season crops, a legume, peas, barley, the grass, and then hairy vetch and sorghum Sudan grass, which are the warm season legume grasses. So we seeded it in mid-May. The idea was that we shredded it in mid-July to kill the peas and oats, and then let the warm season stuff regrow, so let the sorghum and the hairy vetch come back through. And then once that came through, we shredded again in late August, and just leave the stubble over the winter time. And then we could deal with it in the spring when we got to potatoes. So that was the plan. That actually didn't happen. What actually happened, we did plant it when we wanted to. We had a good stand of pea, barley, and hairy vetch, but none of the sorghum showed up. I don't know what happened, but it was just the odd plant. I don't know if it was too cool or what, but we just didn't see any of it. And we shredded it in mid-July, and we had a really nice stand. The picture behind here is the mix, and it became nice and thick. It looked really good. But after we shredded it, we tried a couple of different shredding heights, anywhere from 6 to 8 inches up to 12 inches, to see if we could get better regrowth on one or the other. And kind of didn't see, well, it made a bit of a difference, but for the most part, the hairy vetch was just really slow to grow back. And the weeds that were there, they got shredded off, but it really stressed them out, and so they grew back quickly and started to grow seed. So we left it for about 3 weeks, and then we dissed it all down. Fortunately, I guess for us, the barley had produced some viable seed in mid-July when we shredded it. And so when we dissed this 3 weeks later, we noticed that we had this actually really nice cover crop coming up of barley. And so we ended up just leaving it. It was kind of a happy coincidence. And that's kind of where we are today. We left it out there, put some compost in it, and it's going to die off over the winter, and the potatoes will go in and experiment. So did we accomplish what we wanted? Well, given the moisture, I think we did produce a similar amount of nitrogen compared to our previous system, our 2-round system. We did use less passes in the field. We left the soil covered, saving on labor and equipment. But I know that we put more weed seeds into the field, and with some of these vegetable crops, potatoes, particularly onions, are very competitive, and that can really cost us in future years as far as weed control costs. It means more passes through the field, or in the case of onions where we need to hire hand labor to take care of the weeds, it just costs us more. So we're always trying to keep that in the back of our mind. How can we control the weeds along with this green manure system as well? So I feel like I'm at a bit of a crossroads, to be honest. If we have a dry year, I don't know if there is a better solution. If we have a wet year, I think probably either of these systems would work okay. But we're trying to make things better, and I'm maybe not quite sure where to go from here. So it's good to come to these kind of events and hear what other people are doing. And if anybody has ideas, I'm always open to it. We're still learning. So I think that about answers question 1. So thanks.
Thanks, Jason. So as you can see, I'm surrounded by talkers. So we don't have a ton of time. And I do want to open it up to you guys to ask some questions. So you can see from these three very different organic farming systems. One is crops, livestock, one is mostly grain, and the other one is a potato, or at least it has potatoes in the rotation. That they're using cover crops to achieve a variety of different goals. But the underlying theme throughout all the presentations is that nitrogen fixation is very important on an organic farm. And that's because green manures are pretty much the only tool in the organic farmer's toolkit for that function. So I'm going to focus my question mainly on building that nitrogen fertility, but you guys can feel free to ask them whatever you want. So my first question is, given that organic farmers have to at least seem prepared in the eyes of their certification bodies, i.e. they have to have an annual plan which includes their crop rotation, how flexible is your nitrogen fertility program in that are you able to change it on the fly? And can you give us some examples where you had to do that because obviously fertility is not the only goal that you have on your farm. So give us some examples of where you've had to change things up on the fly and how you've managed to achieve multiple objectives with your green manure program.
Who wants to go first?
Scott kind of touched on it earlier, I think, but for me, I tend to plan things out pretty thoroughly, and once I got a plan, I have a hard time changing it. But the one that I do have an easier time with is in a year with a little more moisture, we'll go towards something like a sweet clover a little more, or alfalfa, where we feel like we need to get something established. And in a little tighter moisture, vice versa. In a tighter moisture year, we'll stick with alfalfa, where if we have a little more moisture available, then red clover. And for me, red clover is easier to kill. Is probably the reason why I like to go that way. Whereas alfalfa, we end up doing a lot more work at the back end to try and get rid of it after. So that's my quick answer. Maybe I'll think something else we guys have done.
We've been fairly fortunate. We haven't had to jump ship halfway through and change too much. But usually, most of my crops, I'd say 75%, we always have sweet clover, maybe the odd little bit of red clover. We don't really grow very good red clover, but our heavy land really likes sweet clover. And so we always try to make sure, even with our, whether it's this year, actually I even did it with peas. I've never done that before, but usually with my wheat, any cereal, we'll always have sweet clover. We always put about 5 to 6 pounds with that. So we're pretty much set for almost any occasion that way. As long as we don't have some winter kill or whatever, we can always have that sweet clover grow in the spring. So if we end up in a wet year, we can graze it, we can work it in, and all of a sudden, if you have that 1.5 foot of sweet clover that you work down the end of May, you're probably going to still get a crop in that one. And so I think for us having a legume kind of always underseeded, but this year kind of bit me in the ass because the pea thing, we did bushel and a half, we did 8 pounds of vetch and 5 pounds of sweet clover along with a full rate of peas, and I broadcast the clover at the same time I sowed the peas, and all of a sudden we ended up having an 1.5 inches of rain right after, and right now I've got vetch that's about 3.5 feet high, and well, it was, and now it's about 2 inches high off the ground, along with the sweet clover and the peas there too. So kind of turned into a jungle, and part of the field ended up coming weedy, and so we chopped it, which is a very nice thing about being flexible with a cattle operation there too. So we utilized some of that, but the rest of the crop that we left out that I thought would look pretty good there, it definitely going to make for a battle. So that's the one thing we kind of have to watch when we start with the sweet clover. In certain mixtures there that can't get too aggressive. So I usually like sowing my sweet clover right down the tube with the wheat, as long as it's an inch or less down. That way it doesn't get so aggressive on us. And a year like this, when we've had almost an irrigation year, can really take off. So the flexibility thing for us is just the fact that we're always trying to have a legume in the mixture there, so we can basically focus on that one and then take some pressure off.
I got one more before I give it to Jason, because he's probably gonna say this anyways. Yvonne talked about, and I think a few others probably mentioned too, trying to get a cool season grass, warm season grass, cool season broadleaf, warm season broadleaf. So I think that shapes a lot of my decision making, and that periodic table that she showed does the same. And the other one I think about, I guess, is just having, if you've got a niche that needs to be filled, peas in a dry year, fava beans in a wet year kind of thing, being able to make those substitutions to fill that particular niche, but deal with the moisture regime that you've got going on, I think is important. So that's it. Oh, yeah.
No, I just got to note down I think for us, in thinking about it, I think our plans are fairly inflexible in the sense that we will grow green manure this next year. It's within the season that I think we have some flexibility, and I mean we experienced it this last year with this one round where we thought we'd just be able to keep shredding, and we ended up having to work it down because the weeds took over. And so I think in season we can be fairly flexible, whether it's a wet or dry. And we've often within our 2 rounds like I talked about, that second round we would shred it down and we'd work it and then we'd plant barley. Well, there's often been cases where we haven't even bothered to we shred it and we'll leave it, and we won't bother to work it because there's just no moisture to get another crop going. So we do have some flexibility within the crop, but the overall rotation, because there's so many moving pieces on a large farm, it's really tough to change.
Okay, thanks guys. Is this working? Okay, so given your learnedness and years of experience working on organic farms, can you tell me what the most important lessons are that you've learned over those years with respect to building soil fertility? Are there fertility crops that you've given up on completely? And if you have, elaborate why you've given up on them. For example, they didn't grow well in your area, or they didn't work in your system, or whatever reason.
Well, I feel like I'm still learning. I don't know, when I thought about this question, I don't really have any lessons to offer. I mean, the only thing that really came to mind was, it seems like to grow a good green manure crop, you need to complement it with that compost. I don't know, that was the kind of the one thing that stood out as those two things have to work together. As far as crops that we've either started or stopped using, I think we've had a bit of a mixed relationship with hairy vetch. Some years it's been awesome, and other years we just cannot get it to grow. And so we'll kind of leave it behind for a couple of years, and then we'll come back to it. And I don't know what's wrong with us, but every now and then it works, and so we just keep doing it.
Yeah, I think I watched Jay's presentation, and trying to get a warm season to grow when you're planting it with cool season crops early on, like it seems like that's what you should do, but I've struggled to get the soybeans or get whatever in that spot to be able to stand up and compete enough so that when you get rid of that cool season crop, shred it or graze it or whatever, you still got something there to regrow. So I don't know. I think you're doing the right thing, but it's that's hard to make that piece fit. It just seems like there's a lot going against it at that stage, and so maybe that means you see it a little bit later or whatever it is. But yeah, there's or graze it off early and then plant into that or something else. But yeah, it's that warm season mix that I miss in my crop rotation. I don't grow a lot of warm season crops. I don't like colonizing in snow, and so I don't like real long season crops. But I'm missing that in my crop rotation, and then to also be missing that in my cover crop, I kind of kick myself and I think I'm doing it wrong. But that's, yeah, it's been a challenge there.
That was the reason we ended up going with a 2-crop GLT, where we started with clover and then integrated that sorghum. And I like to do a bit of soybeans and stuff too, because it seems everything we've read with sorghum or any of these warm seasons, 10th of June, before that you're almost wasting your seed. And that's just talking to different guys too. So it's like there's no point growing a half a crop, you're just wasting your seed. But it's like you say, trying to integrate it, because some years, that 1st of July, I mean, most years we're not bad, but some years it's pretty darn try to get establishment. And if you're counting on that one to do a fair bit of stuff for you, whether it's going to be to keep some cows going for, you know, a month in the fall, or just to even provide some good cover, and all of a sudden all you have is weeds growing, it's kind of frustrating. And back to the fertility one, yeah, I think what Jason said there too, like with the compost and that, we're starting to really focus on that. And like I said, we were big into the hay at one time, and we really sucked our phosphorus out, and we paid for that dearly. So I've really scaled back, where I used to always run like a 50-50 alfalfa rotation, and I loved alfalfa, and then it's like, boy, it really bit me in the butt. So we're at the point now where I still use it on the odd trouble field, like I said, for cleaning things up, but we really scaled back and went to more of these annual forages and stuff like that. But yeah, I haven't found, like, I guess alfalfa be the one that we backed off on. The other ones, like I said, the hairy vetch for us, it seems to really work in our soils. We can see it almost any time, and it's usually there, and sometimes it's bigger than other years, but it works very well. And the forage peas right now, those 40-10s just seem to like growing, and that. The other one I guess that we've tried a couple times and just never got anywhere was fat peas. It seems that they're hit or miss, and maybe I'm just too late getting them in or something like that. And I keep hoping. I see all these great pictures and presentations of 5-foot high fat beans, and keep thinking of all the nitrogen, but maybe some year we'll try again. But I'm kind of like Jason with the hairy vetch. It's like every few years, all of a sudden you kind of forget that it didn't work that good. Maybe you'll get lucky this time. So
It's that farmer optimism, eh? Okay, so I put the mic back, and I'm expecting some brilliant audience questions now.
Arl, have you ever had any problem with palatability issues on your sorghum if it freezes in the fall?
did you say palatability issues? No, actually, we've been 3 years now we've done sorghum. I know this year my cows kind of had to wander across some regrowth there, and just a native pasture, like a little 10-acre piece. And the cows weren't real fond of the sorghum, but they're starting to realize now that there's nothing else, that they're doing okay. And then before that, we've actually had 2 years where we're grazing the yearlings on that sorghum, and it's been probably frozen for a month after. And they're still putting on good pounds, and they're actually cleaning it up. I'd say about 80% we're utilizing out of it. So I've been very happy. But the key with that too is to spend another 30 cents a pound and go with a brown midrib sorghum. The other sorghum there, I mean, it looks great. It's another 2 feet taller, but it just, when it comes to utilization, definitely I think there's probably another third more that we're getting out of the BMR sorghum. It doesn't grow as tall, but just some with the sugars in the plant and that. So if you're thinking of grazing it at all, I definitely would suggest spending a little bit more money on BMR, because there's a big difference between the two of them.
terminating your green manure, and you've got all this nitrogen, you ever have any trouble getting it into available nitrogen for the next year crop? Or does it sometimes take 2 years?
David, that's really the million-dollar question, is what happens to all those nutrients once they end up in the soil? Because we know they're there, or we know that they're there, and we've done lots of biomass testing, we've done lots of soil testing in the spring, the spring after, the fall before, and it just doesn't seem to show up on the tests, and yet the crop seems to respond well. And I think a lot of that just depends on the kind of season that you have. So if is it hot or is it cool, is it wet, is it dry? I think all of those factors play into nutrient release. And but as far as giving you a straight answer on that, I can't do it. Unless maybe these guys.
Yeah, I struggle with that one too. I noticed you guys aren't lining up at the mic here for some reason. I kind of think physical size that you're breaking it up into, like Jay was shredding that stuff. The stuff that I shredded, I thought really melted quickly. And so I think that had a lot to do with it. It was just breaking that up and allowing access for your soil bugs. And yeah, I think that's been part of the decision-making process, including livestock, is I think that's gonna speed that system up a little bit better, kickstart it and get some more below-ground livestock happening that'll kind of be able to move that cycle along a little bit faster or slower, I guess, as it's needed, maybe not always faster, I don't want to see.
Maybe one more thought. I think the timing of your green manure when you take it down makes a difference. If you're earlier on and that carbon to nitrogen ratio is a little bit lower, you're probably going to get a bit faster release. Whereas if you leave that until it's almost mature, that straw hangs around for a lot longer. So I think the timing makes a difference. How much exactly, I'm not sure, but we do tend to notice that it disappears faster if it's a little less mature.
We got a follow-up here.
This one has to do with tillage, I guess. And obviously, if you till more, you're probably going to mineralize that organic matter and fresh and long-term organic matter into more nitrogen. Rodale has been able to show that they can actually increase soil organic matter with their plowed system in combination with some sort of reduced tillage, even no-till organic. But the general consensus out in the country is that tillage is bad and we shouldn't do any. But yet I think there's studies that show that you can still increase soil health with some tillage. So you guys have any comments on that?
After you go to a few cover crop conferences and basically tillage is the devil, you kind of feel kind of small about it, but I dream of a zero-till organic world, and then I go to my quackgrass and thistle patches, and every time that we try to minimize tillage or the years that we have underseeded clover with us, and so we forgo that fall tillage pass. After a couple of years of that in our trouble fields, I think it's a pipe dream. I mean, I'm all ears, and I'm all for if somebody can come up with something, but I think it's a case that it's kind of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, where, yes, we know we have to do this sin, but we pay for this. We make up for the sin by our cover crops and stuff like that, and I think we just have different evils. It's like if you want to say your fungicide and your glyphosate, if you're a conventional farm, you don't really like using it, but you have to use this, another tool in the toolbox. And I think if we can do that, where we always have something to replace that, so we're not out there doing black summer, fall all year. And now I'm saying that, I've had 2 fields this year that I had to do that with because it was just a mess, and you have to get things under control. It doesn't matter what you put there, but I think at the same token, as bad as some people say tillage, you'll never gain ground by tilling even with cover crops. I don't buy that. I think that there's a happy in between there, where maybe it's going to be a little bit slower than what your neighbor is if he could, with the whole package deal with integrating livestock and doing the full meal deal. But I still think that we can gain a lot of ground yet too, even with tillage.
Yeah, I think I'm optimistic there too as well. I always look at that, I forget if it's a regenerative ag pyramid or soil health pyramid or whatever, that the one on top is tillage, and the way that I read that is we can get the 80% level for sure, and that's just a little kind of pyramid on top. But I think, yeah, so many of us are so far from doing all of that stuff right, that if we do commit that 1%, I guess that's okay. And I think that fungicides and some of the things that I watch my neighbors who criticize the amount of tillage that I do, I think they have a lot more, using fungicides I think is really hard on your soil bacteria and soil fungi, and a lot of that just we don't hear it as much in the media, but I think there's a lot of steps backwards that have happened because of those tools. And so yeah, getting away from fertilizer and chemical use is a big part of that pyramid as well. And I don't think we all need to quit using all of my research. That's not what I'm trying to say, but I think that trying to reduce those units are going to help overall. So I'm not sure. I think it's still part of the toolkit.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe the best part about that pyramid is that it's maybe think about how much we till and when and where, and do we actually need it or do we not? You know, it's just, for me, it's maybe, can we reimagine how we do this? So next spring when we go to seed our green manure into this hemp stubble, do we really need to disc it before, or can we just go in there and maybe a few hemp volunteers is not the end of the world? You know, things like that. It makes me think that if we can get away from it, I mean, it's going to save us some money, and maybe it's going to save a bit of the organic matter in the soil as well. So
I think we do a lot of learning from doing things by mistake, or I know that I do anyways, or things that I bugger up off and look after it after and say, oh, that's not that bad. And this year, with all the moisture, I think a lot less tillage happened, and maybe we'll learn something from that next year, I guess. I'm glad to see all your faces here, because I think there's a huge opportunity, because for me, the number one obstacle to growing cover crops has been lack of moisture, and I think we heard that a few times today. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I've got more moisture than I know what to deal with at the moment, which probably means we're going to be in the same situation next spring. And so I think for those of you that are thinking about doing this is a great time to give something a try. And I don't care what it is, but try something new, because it's it's just a huge opportunity in my eyes where we're at right now.
Thanks, guys. Before I hand the stage back over to Patty, I just wanted to point out that I mentioned earlier that there is a green manure toolkit on the pivotandgrow.com website, and I just noticed that there's cards over on the side table there. And I also wanted to point out that Alan and Scott are both kind of media stars in that they have recently both been in a podcast called Grain on the Brain, put on by the same organization that made the Green Manure Toolkit, which is called the Prairie Organic Grain Initiative. So those cards are over there as well, and you can listen to them. And last plug, which is, I hope you have not all been completely frightened off of organic, and if you at all are interested in learning more, we're holding a big 2-day conference in this very venue downstairs, March 5th and 6th, 2020. So I hope you'll all be there. And with that, we'll let Patty come back and